So welcome back to the workshop. In today's video, I'm going to show you how I made this large L-shaped desk. The desk is around 2 meters long by 1.5 meters wide. There was so much going on with this build, with a carved wave panel wrapping around the whole outside of the desk and a bent laminated raised monitor unit, which I'll get to later. It was actually one of my longest projects to date. It took a very long time to make. It had to be perfect, not only visually, but functionally. This desk was modular. It came apart into around 7 pieces, and that's because it had to get taken down into a basement office. So because it was such a large desk, I couldn't take it down in one piece. So all the walls and the cabinets and the tabletop had to lock into position perfectly without any gaps, and it still had to be very sturdy and strong. So the desk is broken up into 7 main components: the back leg, 2 side walls, 2 cabinets, and the L-shaped tabletop is split in half. All the components are bolted together with Festool connectors, which helped a lot with alignment and strength, locking everything together. The woods I used on this project are ash and elm, and I added some ebony accents with the handles of the drawers and the doors. For the tabletop, I used wych elm from Scotland, and the lining behind the ash wave panel, I used burr elm. I also mentioned in my last video that my brother and I were going for a bit of a rebrand. We're going to get a new logo and a new website. But I'm pleased to say, after months of building, the website is live. You may have noticed that our new logo is already on YouTube and Instagram. We absolutely love it. If you're interested in the symbol, it is an antelope, and that has a connection with our family because traditionally it's in our Evelix family crest. So I love the heritage, and I'm just really proud of the logo. I think it looks great. And talking about the website, feel free to click the link in the description to check it out. And also this website has a new shop page which I'm launching. Currently I've got 6 products on there, but I will be adding a lot more in the future. And I'm excited to come up with lots of designs to put on there. Sometimes in burr veneer you get some voids where bark or some knots were and they fall out. So I had to patch them in. I didn't just want to patch them in with epoxy, I wanted to fill in those voids with the veneer itself so the colour matched perfectly. So I used my laser to cut out some discs out of the same burr veneer, and then I used the shaper origin to mortise out a perfect circle. I then glued those discs in and clamped it in place with some masking tape, and once it was dry and sanded, they blended in really nicely. One thing I haven't tried yet with the shaper origin is custom mortise and tenon joinery. I've seen a few woodworkers make some unique curved tenons that fit perfectly in a corresponding mortise, and I think it's a really nice design element of a piece. So you may see me in the future implement some custom unique joinery in my pieces. Last month, I was actually nominated for Young Woodworker of the Year award by Heritage Crafts. Heritage Crafts is a large organisation in the UK that also does work all around the world. They specialise in preserving skilled craftsmanship, whether that be woodworking, metalworking, leatherworking, glassblowing, ceramics. They fund a lot of initiatives to preserve the craft, get people into it, and supporting makers, as well as promoting and championing makers. They have one award ceremony every year, giving out awards to the best makers in each field. When I was nominated for this award, it was an incredible feeling that my work had been recognised, and I couldn't quite believe it. Last week, my brother and I attended Eltham Palace, where the award ceremony was held. It was an incredible experience, an amazing setting, and it was brilliant being surrounded by lots of other makers chatting about the work they do. And I'm thrilled to announce that I actually won the award for Young Woodworker of the Year. I couldn't quite believe it. They even gave me a trophy and a plaque, and I can't wait to put that on my wall. So I just want to say thank you to Heritage Crafts for the award. I'm absolutely thrilled. And if you want to find out a bit more about it, I will be writing about it and uploading photos of the event on the blog section on our website if you want to check it out. So off camera, on all the cabinets and walls, I added a hardwood lipping on all the edges. I also added a 5mm foot on the bottom of all the cabinets and walls, which raised the desk up slightly and created a very decorative shadow line underneath the wave panel I'm going to add a little later on. Here you can see me marking out the locations for the festal connectors. These are really strong non-permanent fixings you can add to furniture, and they're perfect for modular units that you want to take apart. So this allowed me to transport the desk in separate pieces really easily, take them down the stairs in my client's home, and then join them all together in the office. And once you've tightened all the bolts in these fixings, it is really solid and there is no flex at all. I think when building a custom piece of furniture, every single element of the piece has to be thought through. So I wanted to add a cable management solution to this desk. And you can see I made this solid wood cable tray that I'm now morsing into the back of the desk. So all the computer cables, the speaker cables, will be able to slot through that curved hole at the front of the desk and then sit on that cable tray. The desk will be sitting over a floor plug socket, so all the cables that are resting on that cable tray will then be directed down a cable channel directly into the plug socket. I think it's a very neat solution, and also you won't trip over cables on the floor or get in the way of anything on the desktop. For this desk, I added Blum undermount soft close drawer runners, which I really like because when you open up the drawer, you don't see any metal drawer slides and they're all hidden away. However, there is one downside to these drawer runners that I really wish Blum fixes in the future. And that is all the screw hole fixings are not elongated and they're just holes for individual screws. Which is absolutely okay if you're screwing these drawer slides in a man-made board like MDF or plywood that doesn't expand and contract. You can just screw the drawer runner right into that wall. But if you want to add these into a solid wood cabinet that has a lot of wood movement with expansion and contraction, those fixings just don't have the tolerances for it. If you just added 3 screws along the length of the drawer runner into a solid wood cabinet, when the wood expands or contracts, the drawer runner isn't allowing for that because it's locked the wood in position, so the wood can easily crack or the drawer runner could break. So what I do is I use a handsaw and a file to elongate some holes, which allows a bit of side-to-side movement with that screw. So when the wood expands, that screw can move slightly in that screw hole, and then the drawer runner won't bind. All the drawers on this desk are dovetailed. I used 2 different methods to cut the dovetails on this desk. The desktop drawers, I used solely hand tools, and on the drawer unit, I tried a new technique of cutting the tails on the bandsaw. Now, even cutting the tails on the bandsaw, I still believe that is hand-cut joinery because it takes a great level of skill to cut a straight line, but I also used a handsaw to cut the pins on that joint. I wanted to try out this bandsaw technique because it allows you to cut dovetails in thicker material. Generally, the thicker the material is, it is harder to cut the dovetail and you might end up with more gaps. If you're interested in learning how to cut dovetails, or you want to know all the tips and tricks I have of getting perfect looking dovetails with no gaps, then I made a 3-part series on my YouTube channel. I'll put a tag on top of the screen now or a link in the description down below if you want to check it out. If you've watched the channel for a while, you'll know that I'm pretty picky with dovetails. I think it's very easy to tell if a joint has been hand cut or not, where a router has been used to cut the tails and pins. Now, I'm not saying I'm never going to use a router dovetail jig in my life. It definitely has its place. But I do honestly believe if you're looking for a traditional looking dovetail or the most attractive looking dovetail, then you don't want to use a router jig. And that is because the majority of the time the tails and the pins end up being the exact same size, which is a telltale sign a router has been used. But the biggest flaw with router dovetails is that the pin itself is very wide. For hand cut dovetails, the pin should be so narrow that a router bit just cannot fit in that gap, and that is a sign that a joint has been hand cut. But for router dovetails, if the bit was too narrow, it would just snap and break. So the router bit has to be wide enough for the cutter to be strong, to hog out all that material in between both tails, which sadly does end up making the pin oversized. So even when I used the bandsaw, I made sure that the tails were so close together, it's still going to give you the traditional look. And there was still a lot of hand tool work involved, from the chiseling and then cutting the pins with the handsaw. But this process of cutting the tails on the bandsaw worked really well, and I'll definitely be confident cutting dovetails twice the thickness than this on the bandsaw now. I don't think furniture should just look good. How it feels in the hand is equally as important, and that's what can set your work apart from others. So I make sure every edge of the piece is sanded, whether that is just a little iris, a chamfer, or a profile. All of them make a difference from just having a sharp edge. So if you're getting into woodwork, I highly recommend going the extra mile, feeling every edge and surface of the piece. If there's any rough part, give it another sand. If there's a sharp corner, round it over. Even on the areas that you don't see, like underneath a table or the inside of a drawer, make sure there are no sharp edges and add a chamfer on all the areas. And not only does it add a design element, it also feels really nice in the hand. To create the wave panel, I used a selection of tools. To remove most of the waste, I used a grinder with a turbo plane. That was great at creating the lines and the valleys and removing most of the waste. But then when I wanted a bit more control and have a bit more of a gentler cut, I changed to a cut saw disc, which is a metal pad with metal spikes on it. It's a lot more aggressive than sandpaper, but easier to control than the turbo plane. And that sort of refined the curves and smoothed everything out, but it still left a very rough surface. So after that, with the very fine areas, I used chisels and then switched to sandpaper. The final sanding stage alone took about 2 days, and the whole carving process in total took about 2 weeks. Early on in this process, I was power carving inside, and I realised very quickly that it was incredibly dusty, so I moved outside, and luckily I wasn't held back by the weather. It wasn't raining at all, and actually it was very enjoyable machining outside because the sun was out and it was a nice change of scenery. Once each slat was sanded, I then added a chamfer on every edge of each slat, which not only added to the design, but it also removed that sharp edge. To attach each slat onto the cabinet, I used the domino, which creates a mortise into both sides, into the cabinet and into the slat, and then I add a floating tenon to connect both together. I added 2 on each slat, which locked it in at the top and bottom and created a very strong joint. One thing videos don't portray well is how long certain tasks take. Some tasks are so repetitive I only show a few clips of it. For example, the wood machining and planing for this project took weeks to do. Just the slats alone for the wave panel, there were hundreds in this desk, and it took around 3 days just to plane all those slats. I had to cut them oversized from a rough sawn board. If you didn't know what a rough sawn board was, that is a board directly from the sawmill, so you often still see the chainsaw marks in the board. And these are literally just rough, and they can be warped and cut as the wood is put in the kiln and dried. So a big part of furniture making is actually machining up this timber, planing it, cutting it to size into usable material. And it takes a very long time, but there are tons of benefits of machining up material yourself. First being is you have total control of grain selection, so you can go to the timber store, pick the boards you like with the most beautiful grain, and then you can mill it up yourself. If you buy online pre-planed boards, you just have to get what you're given when it's delivered to your workshop. Another benefit of planing material yourself is you know you're going to get a board that is completely flat. Even if you buy online and it says it's been planed all round, wood still moves after it's been planed. So quite often you'll buy a planed board, but it will still arrive at your house with a slight cup in it or a slight bow. And that is because wood moves to new environments and it settles into new conditions. So if you plane it in one location where it has a different temperature or humidity, when the wood gets transported to your workshop, it will then move again and settle to its new environment, which may result in it not being flat. What a lot of woodworkers actually do is a 2-stage machining process. And that is purely because we know wood moves even after planing, and that is because you're exposing new grain to the air and it will then resettle and acclimatise. So what I would do is I would plane up all the material oversized at the beginning of the project to remove all those rough sawn marks and expose new grain to the air and the environment of the workshop. And then the minimum amount of time I would leave those boards for is 24 hours, but to be honest, the longer the better. The more time it has to settle, you'll know that all the warping and the stresses have been sort of squeezed out the boards. And then once those boards have settled, I will then plane the boards again, removing all that warping, and that will ensure the boards will remain flat and be a lot more stable. I didn't want any area of the desk to be overlooked. All the specific areas that you'll interact with, like the door handles at the front of the desk or the drawer handles, I didn't want those to be rushed. It would be very easy just to cut out a finger pull or even screw on a handle that just didn't match. So I wanted to create something that was very refined, very elegant, that also matched the rest of the desk. So I know I wanted this handle to protrude out past the wave panel, but also have a curve to it so it flowed and fit within it. And this being a luxury desk, I thought ebony was a really good choice for these handles. Another reason using a contrasting wood for the handle is that it would be easily visible. If I made an ash handle, it would quite easily be lost in the wave panel and you wouldn't know where to open the door. So with these ebony handles, I hand carved each side so they were recessed in, so your fingers gripped the handle really nicely. It's a very subtle element that you can't necessarily see with the naked eye because the ebony is so black and it just looks like an arced profile. But when you go to grip the handle, your fingers really sort of nest in place and gives you a lot of control in opening and closing the drawer or the door. I've just hit 3,000 followers on Instagram, so thank you so much for everyone who's followed me over there. I've recently been uploading lots of photos of my work. I also post a lot of pictures that are commissions that I don't film for YouTube, so if you want to see more of my work that you don't see on YouTube, then make sure you head over to Instagram and follow me over there. So now I'm working on the raised monitor unit for the desktop. This is actually my second attempt at this. So originally I decided to go for a bent lamination. I made a mould for it and I bought a bundle of elm veneer. The issue I was having with it though was the curve is quite tight and I was getting a bit of spring back once I released it from the mould. Another issue that I ran into that I didn't actually pre-plan was the void that I'd have to fill on either side of the bent lamination that the drawer would need to butt up against to slide in and out. And I realised that was actually going to be quite hard to achieve neatly. So I decided to scrap that idea of a bent lamination and I decided to make each end out of solid ash. I cut the curve on the bandsaw and sanded it to its final shape. I then connected both ends with a board that I dominoed in place. Once that was all set, I then veneered a sheet of wych elm across the whole length, and that worked perfectly. Both ends were rock solid, and the grain flowed up that curve perfectly. I found this lovely board of elm that I wanted to be the front of all the desktop drawers, but then I had a really nice idea of not only the grain flowing between the drawers, but the grain continuing to flow into the curved unit. So I had to very carefully cut out enough material for all the drawer fronts, leaving the surrounding material to be glued on the front of the raised monitor unit. I then later glued on that board to the front of the drawers, and the grain matched perfectly across the whole length of the unit. Mortising the raised monitor unit into the tabletop was a challenging task. I wanted that join to be seamless, so I used the router to hog out most of the material. Then I used a selection of saws, chisels and planes to refine that edge to make sure it was as flat as possible. I wanted to make the raised monitor unit look like it was part of the whole desk, like it was carved out of one large piece of wood. So I wanted the grain to flow across the tabletop up that curve, and that effect would be completely ruined if there was a gap. So I added a ton of clamps to make sure the joint was as tight as possible, and I'm absolutely thrilled with how it came out. I'm not sure which one I'm more proud of, the raised monitor unit or the wave panel. I think they're two really nice features of the desk. So the raised monitor unit has 3 drawers underneath, which I hand cut dovetails for. And like I mentioned earlier, I used the same wood as I did for the raised monitor unit for the drawer fronts, so the grain flowed across the whole unit perfectly. I also added some hand carved ebony handles to these drawers, which I chiselled and mortised in the top. As you probably worked out, this is a bespoke piece of furniture. It is a one-off item. And if you're interested in a piece of furniture for yourself or your business, then please get in touch with us. A link to our website will be in the description down below where you can contact us, and we'd love to make a piece for you. I finished the desk with Rubio Monaco Oil Plus 2C. I did 2 parts pure to 1 part mist 5%, and that's purely because I wanted to keep the wood its lovely white colour and I didn't want it to yellow too much. The pure itself is a very rich oil and it's very warm, so it's perfect for darker woods, but if you add it to a light wood it can add a yellow tinge to it. So I add a little bit of mist 5%, which dulls that down and keeps the light wood natural colour. Applying the finish on the wave panel was a very time consuming process as I needed to get the finish in between each slat by hand. For the flat areas like the tabletop, I added a beige scrubby pad on my orbital sander, which really helped buff the finish into the grain. And once that first coat dried, I then added a layer of Sheen Plus, which added a lovely satin sheen to the top. So now it's time to set up the desk and see how it looks. I couldn't be more happy with this project. I really hope you liked it and you enjoyed watching this video. If you're new to the channel, feel free to subscribe because I've got some fantastic builds coming up. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to give it a like, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this piece in the comments down below. So thank you very much for sticking to the end of the video, and I'll see you very soon for the next one.